Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. Today we are working on the bed again. Yay, we're finally getting back around to this. We're putting the panels inset into the headboard and the footboard, and this is one of those tricks that it can be very daunting and scaring a lot of people, but if you do it right, it's fairly simple. But be warned, we're going to be doing some resawing, so let's dive in. It's that time again. What time is it? Bedtime! Okay, we need to actually do some work on this thing. And the next thing we need to do is put the panels into the headboard and footboard. It looks fairly straightforward, is that they're just 1/4-inch panels into the slots. However, we want them to be butterflied out of Quartersawn wood. And then there's an arch on the top that these all have to be carved to fit. And so this sounds like a fairly difficult step all of a sudden. But it's really not if you take it step by step. I have several boards of beautiful Quartersawn white oak with a lot of figure in it, and this piece even has some curl on the end. I was very, very happy to find that. Curly white oak is, one of my favorites, and then you put it in curly Quartersawn white oak with all the grain and the rays flying through it. It's beautiful, beautiful stuff. So first thing I want to do is cut this all to length, and I want to measure the length of these panels and then add 4 or 5 inches to them to make sure I have some play so I can pick the best grain out of each piece. So I'm cutting them all longer than they need to be so that I can work with them once they get in. And here I'm going to be pulling out my buck saw. I grab this anytime I just want to do very fast cuts down across the grain, and I don't really care about the quality, I just want to move fairly quickly. And it has a relatively fast chomp through the wood. And it's a lot of fun to use. Anytime you can pull out a buck saw, it is enjoyable. So it's slice, and we are through. Now we have all of these boards cut to length. Then the next step comes with the resawing, and that is what really scares a lot of people. We have 8 boards that are going to be 6.5 inches wide, and we need to resaw them down. But before we actually resaw them, I forgot, I'm going to need to rip these down to the correct width. They're all a little over 6.5 inches wide, and I want them to bring them down into that because 6.5 is half the width of the panel. Actually, 6.5 is a little bit more than half the width of the panel. So I'm going to mark them at 6.5 and then take them over to the saw bench and rip them down. Now, to measure how wide these need to be, I measure the opening that the panel needs to fill. And the panel is 12 inches wide that you actually see. It's a slightly bit over 12 inches wide. I know there's a 1/4-inch groove on either side, so that means that the panel needs to be a 1/2 inch wider than the opening. So that means a little bit more than 12.5 inches. So if I cut them at 6.5, that gives me another 1/2 inch that I can work with, because 6.5 plus 6.5 is 13 inches. So I'm going to cut these all to 6.5 inches wide so that when I butterfly them together, I will end up with a 13-inch wide board. I'll actually end up with a little bit less because I'm going to plane down one edge to joint the 2 pieces together. Now it comes time for resawing, and I want to slice these right down the middle. That'll give me 2 pieces that are a little over 3/8 of an inch, because I'm going to plane them back to a 1/4 inch wide. But having them a little wider, again, gives you more to play with, more to see what's going on. Here I'm using my Robot style frame saw, and I have several videos on how to resaw, and I just put out one a couple weeks ago. It is an incredibly fun saw to use. You can just use a handsaw, and actually I believe this board that I did the video, I ended with just a handsaw. And it's just important to cut down the board and cut along the side you can see. Yeah, see, I pulled out the handsaw to finish this one off. It just makes it a little bit easier so it doesn't fall and hit the bench. And then we can open this up and see how they come out. If you take your time and you're not pushing the saw and forcing it, you can get a nice clean cut. And I always love the pile of sawdust that comes out the other side. It's just kind of a fun bit of white oak sawdust. Next thing I want to do is joint these 2 pieces together. So I'm going to sandwich them up in the vise and flush up the 2 edges and then run along them with a jointer, making sure to take out more in the middle so that I can be sure to get a perfectly flat and true edge. And then I'll check them and make sure that these fit together. A thin bead of glue running all the way along it. I know I'm going to have a lot of people asking me, why aren't you using biscuits or dowels or something like that to strengthen the joint? Dowels and biscuits do not strengthen a joint. That is an old myth, or a new myth as they're more common now. Glue is all you need, and dowels and biscuits are just there for alignment. So you can plane them beforehand and then put them together. But as I'm going to be planing them all afterwards, I don't need dowels and biscuits. So here I'm going to sharpen up my iron, and I have a whole pile of videos on sharpening, but it's just very good to have a good sharp iron. I don't check my iron by shaving hair. I just do that for the video because it is a good way of explaining in a video how sharp the blade needs to be. If it cuts some hair, it's still dull. If it cuts most hair, it's still dull. If it cuts every single hair it touches on the first pass perfectly smooth and clean, then it's sharp. And that's the best way I can describe it without actually showing you what the edge of the blade feels like. And then we want to bring down one edge of this nice and true. So I'm making one edge smooth and flat, and I can use that face to then be the edge that I'm referencing off of. Sorry, I say edge, it's a face, not an edge. Here I'm using the end of the board, and with a low angle plane I can flatten that out. And the reason I'm flattening out is so that it runs onto the planing stop that I'm using it on. In the end, I decided not to use the planing stop and just go between dogs, but it worked pretty well. So here I have a scrub plane, and I'm going with the grain with the scrub plane, and you can see these curls coming out. That's just to get rid of most of the junk. And then I can take the edge off of the far corner and then traverse the board by going across the grain. And here you get these weird chip out curls. And I'll show an end video where you can see all the different curls that come out. Going across the grain is just easier to push, whereas going with the grain is a little bit harder, but it goes quicker. So it's kind of a balance between the two. And I often go back and forth. I'll do some with the grain and some across the grain, and that just makes it so you get a flatter surface. But the scrub plane is going to take it down close to the line that I drew around the edge and into the board. I'm going to stay away from it, but as I get close to it and I'm just a few shavings away, then I'm going to switch over to using a number 6 or a number 7. I think in this case I'm using my number 6. And I'm going to use this to then flatten out all of the ridges made by the scrub plane. Then I'm going to start actually doing the smoothing on this. And for that, I'm going to bring out my 4.5 as it does a larger surface. I'm just going to take everything down to the line with this. This will be the last depth cut that I'm going to make. The number 4 does a really quick job of that. Then I'm going to bring in my smoothing plane and just do a clean smooth across the panel and get a really nice clean surface. Because you're doing a butterfly joint here, a book match joint, each side, one side you're going to be running against the grain and one side you're running with the grain. Doing a good smoothing plane helps take that out. Then the card scraper will get rid of any last little bit. There was some in the glue joint that was down a little bit lower, and the card scraper and the scraping plane do the last good work of that. Here you can see all the shavings and what plane makes them. It's kind of an interesting thing to see. Next I want to figure out where these panels will go, and so I look at both sides, see which one has the better figure, see which side I want out, which side I want down, and then I'm going to label them so that they match as they go across the bed. James middle, Sarah middle, Sarah. It's easier to mark which side of the bed they go on. Now I'm going to be clamping on this, clamping on the clamp here and using it as a stop. You can see I can set the panel on that, and it is 1/4 inch below the edge of the beam going across. Then I can turn this all around and use a pencil to sketch out exactly where the inside of the frame is. Once I have this exactly marked out, then I can bring it over and put a quarter inch mark outside of that frame size. And I'm going to be using 1/4 inch all the way around because right now I'm in a wet season and the wood's just about as large as it's going to be inside. So I want it to be pretty large because once it dries in the winter and shrinks all the way down, then I don't want any gaps to be showing as it shrinks beside the groove. Then with that new line that we drew, a 1/4 inch outside of the line that was marked, we can bring it over to the saw bench and cut it out. And you can see there's a good bit of tear out on the bottom, and that scares a lot of people, but it's not a huge issue as I'm going to be putting this into a groove, so none of it is going to be showing. But just to get rid of that tear out, you just run a plane along it, cleans it out pretty nicely, and you're good to go. Next thing I want to do is just chamfer all of these edges a little bit. It makes them fit into the groove a little bit easier. It also allows them to wedge in. These panels are actually slightly thicker than the groove. The groove is slightly smaller, 1/4 inch, and these panels are exactly a 1/4 inch. And that causes it to wedge in place. So putting that little bit of a chamfer right on the corner, the chamfer is going to be hidden inside the groove, so the chamfer is less than a 1/4 inch deep. But it wedges these down in place, giving you a really nice tight fit, and they just kind of pop into place then. And I'm really, really happy with that. So we can just put this whole thing together, make sure everything comes out, and start to get a look at how this is all fitting and looking. I'm getting really happy and looking forward to the next step. Booyah! So there you have it. This is a lot of fun. It's starting to get there. You can start to see how the bed is coming together. Next time we're going to be doing all the hash work that goes in between this rail and this rail, and hopefully getting these looking like headboards. And probably the time after that we'll be putting on the top plate and all of those corbels. So we are getting there. There are only 4 or 5 more videos in the bed build, and I'm really looking forward to making this happen. So if you have any questions, let me know down below. Also, if you'd like to see the artistic video, I'll leave a link to that down below. It's just where I do all the same things, but it's just laid back without all the talking over top. So if you get tired of my voice, go and watch the main channel. So if you liked it, please hit like, comment, subscribe, and share the video. That really does help out the channel. Thank you for that. And until next time, have a wonderful day. So today we've done a lot of resawing on panels. Does that make me a panel saw?